welcome everyone to another deep dive session, this time focusing on the youngest users. And this session will explore what we know about risks and opportunities online for the youngest users of technology. Evidence clearly shows that children are going online earlier than ever. And when we talk today about the youngest user, we are particularly referring to this age group of children from 0 to 12 years old. So really those that will be teenagers and young adults by 2030 in the near future, and who will feel the impact and have to live with the decisions we are taking today. As you can see, we have a great speaker lineup who will share their experience and discuss possible solutions for this age group. I welcome Professor Jochen Petra from Amsterdam School of Communication Research. We have Shanta Arul, who is the Director of Global Technology and Innovation Public Policy at Netflix, and Matthias Jax, who is a social media expert and project manager at the Austrian Safer Internet Center. We will hear and we will have presentation from all three of them. However, I encourage everyone to post your questions and comments in the chat. We will make sure to bring you in. We will pause a minute or two after each presentation. And if you raise your hand, we can bring you in. We can enable your microphone so you can ask your question directly to our speakers and make your comments. We want to make this session as active as possible, so do please share your thoughts in the chat. Before I hand over to Professor Jochen Petra, I want to pick up one finding from the European Commission consultation, and I quote here: "Distance learning seems to have been more problematic for the younger age groups." Interesting, several focus groups highlighted their concerns specifically for younger children, stating that they are curious and they will click on things without realizing what type of content they may faced with. They are considered less experienced and more vulnerable. In relation to this, YouTube influencers were also mentioned several times. One respondent talked about younger users wanting to impress their favorite YouTuber and imitating their behavior without realizing that some of these challenges can be life-threatening. This is a very big concern, so I'm very great that we have our experts here with us today. And with this said, I'm handing over to Professor Jochen Petra to kick us off. Jochen, the floor is yours.
So, hello everybody. Thank you for attending this session. And in this deep dive session, well, I'm trying to take a, very deep dive. I will talk about what I consider the most important and most likely technological developments for children in the next decade. Much of this, I admit, will be speculation. Predicting the future of technological developments has been notoriously difficult and infamously wrong. Still, I believe it's worth the effort. I believe so because in nearly all research on children and technology, and my work included, we tend to be overtaken by the technological developments. But only if we roughly know what technological changes children may face in the future can we now already ask the crucial questions. So what I'm trying to do is to provide you with some ideas about what might be fundamental changes in children's technological environments in the future. I will first introduce 5 broad trends in technology, with special attention to communication through technology. These trends may help us to identify what the future will bring. Based on these trends, I will then present what I consider the crucial change in children's media environment in the next 10 years and define it. I'll then discuss what I consider the main opportunities, but also the main risks of this environment. And I conclude by saying a few words about what I think needs to be done to safeguard children's interests and rights. Again, I'd like to emphasize that I do present partly speculations. I may be wrong, and you may disagree with me. I run this risk happily if I can steer up a discussion. So let me turn to what I think are 5 crucial trends in communication and technology these days. First, there has been a trend away from mass communication toward human-machine communication. Only 30 years ago, few people would have doubted that mass communication was the most common type of communication next to face-to-face communication. Newspapers, print newspapers, and television was linear television. To be clear, mass communication still exists today. There are print newspapers and linear television and radio channels. But it changed radically when, roughly in the mid-90s, the internet became more widely used. Now communication between people was mediated by computers. Although this had been possible before, the internet changed how people communicated with each other dramatically. Initially thought of as a medium for the exchange of information, the internet quickly developed into a place where people would socialize with all the different platforms we know today. Important here is both mass and computer-mediated communication are based on communication between humans. But as scholars have pointed out already some time ago, it is crucial to realize that much communication no longer takes place only between humans, but can take place completely between machines. Think of the Internet of Things, for example, or between humans and machines. Digital agents are now increasingly common, and voice assistants such as Siri, Cortana, or Alexa are used more and more frequently. Communication with machines can also come in the form of communicating with bots on the internet or in the physical world with social robots, or for children in particular with internet-connected toys. In any case, it is important to realize that machines become our communication partner increasingly often. A second trend is related to this, and it refers to the source of information. Simply put, in mass communication, the source of communication was mainly a journalist or a professional of some sort. In computer-mediated communication, this changed. Now, the people, we could also be sources. The more content we could produce ourselves, the more we become sources. Think of a text that you send to somebody else. Well, you are the source. Moreover, we can decide ourselves to whom we want to send the content we create. Just a friend, a group of people, or to anybody who can access the internet. So this change from predominantly professional sources to basically anybody with an internet connection is quite a radical change. But more recently, we also witnessed that technology can be the source, for example, in the form of voice assistants or bots, as I've already said. A third trend that I would like to draw your attention to is the change in the, well, what is often called cues that users get in communication, mediated communication, I should add. Mediated communication has traditionally somewhat inferior in its cue richness to face-to-face communication, where all the different senses are typically addressed. It was, in the case of newspapers, mainly textual, in the case of television, audiovisual, but it lacked usually haptic and spatial cues. Computer communication also, let's realize, that was in the beginning mainly text-based. Only later had we as the users increasingly the chance to include images and sounds. But even with all that progress, the internet is still largely two-dimensional. Take this talk as an example. You can see me, you can hear me, read the slides, but that's it. With developments, especially in virtual reality, spatial cues become increasingly important. And this is, in the view of many tech observers, one of the directions into which the internet is heading. Haptic cues may also become progressively relevant, especially, for example, with social robots made for interactions that you can touch. And in terms of advanced toys, internet-connected toys, particularly relevant for children. So the general trend here is toward more cue richness. Fourth, there is a trend to what the Dutch scholar Rini van Eest has called intimate technologies. Technologies used to be somewhat distant, think of a desktop computer, and became closer, think of the laptop. And nowadays, the smartphone is something that we literally touch all the time. There's also technology between us, for example, in the form of social media, technology about us. Think of all the tracking devices that tell us how many steps we have made or how many hours we have slept. And perhaps a bit science fiction, technology can by now already be like us. Think of so-called androids, so computers that really look like human beings, or technology can be inside us in terms of implanted devices, for example. So the key is the difference between technology and us becomes smaller and smaller. The fifth and last element that I consider important for getting an idea of how children's technological environment may look in the next decade centers on this change from the physical reality to virtual reality. To be clear, physical reality, or what we simply call the real world, will of course not disappear. Moreover, virtual reality has already been around for a while. But still, what we see in the past years is that applications in augmented reality, or sometimes also augmented virtuality, have increased. Augmented reality are applications in which there is an overlay of the virtual information on the real world. Think, for example, of Pokemon Go. Augmented virtual reality refers to an overlay of the real on the virtual, and both augmented reality and augmented virtuality form mixed reality. Virtual reality is a reality completely created by computers. So the most important thing here to take into account is that worlds that are either fully or partially virtual become increasingly common. Both for adults and certainly for children, the share of experiences only had in the physical world is going down. So I do think that these trends together, and let me be clear, there are certainly many more other trends, but I want to focus on these 5. So I do think that these trends together can really help us to identify the basic direction where we are heading and how the next 10 years may look. I also contend that these trends that I identified to some extent culminate in what is currently called the Metaverse. I will explain more elaborately what it is in a minute. For the time being, just think of it as a successor to the internet and sort of like a 3D internet. I should also add that I definitely in this talk do not intend to promote the Metaverse, certainly not because the big tech companies, especially Facebook, heavily invest in the development of this Metaverse. But I strongly believe that just because the tech companies pursue the Metaverse so intensely, it is important to follow this development, and it will in one way or another shape the future. So in this Metaverse, interaction with machines, or more specifically computer-generated infrastructures, will become more frequent than today. Machines, for example, digital agents or digital assistants, will be sources of information. Cues will be textual, audiovisual, no doubt about that, but much more also spatial. It is really about being in there, in this Metaverse, a strong sense of being present in that environment. The technologies used, for example, in this Metaverse may be equivalents of head-mounted devices that we know already, augmented reality classes. And again, they will be increasingly close to us. And from what I said before, it should also be clear that the physical reality recedes in favor of these extended reality applications. So in a nutshell, I do think that these trends somehow culminate in the Metaverse. What specifically now is this Metaverse? The term Metaverse is currently still rather vague, and that reflects to some extent the uncertainty that surrounds any attempt to predict technological developments. But I do think it is useful as a starting point to capture where current developments culminate. So let me try to explain what it is. One definition I found very useful is by the tech analyst and venture partner Matthew Ball, who identified the 7 following defining elements. First, the metaverse is persistent. It stays. It does not stop like a game. It always continues. Second, the metaverse is synchronous and live. Much of our current internet is asynchronous and not live. Think of video clips on YouTube. The metaverse is supposed to be live and real time by default. Third, there is an unlimited number of concurrent users. Everyone with access to the necessary technology can participate in the metaverse. Fourth, the metaverse does rely on virtual technology, but it is not just virtual reality. It connects the physical and the analog world with the virtual and the digital world. An example may, for example, Pokemon Go, frequently used augmented reality application. It also implies that there will be increasingly more digital representations of things from the physical world. Think of famous buildings or certain infrastructure. Fifth, the metaverse will offer interoperability of digital data and content between applications. Now, for example, today it is difficult to move some items from one game to another. In the metaverse, this should be possible. Sixth, the metaverse depends on on the content that the users generate and distribute, similar to what we've seen in the last decade on the internet, but at a much larger scale. And seventh, there will be a full economy in that metaverse. One could probably devote several talks to this point. Important here is that goods and services will be created, sold, and bought in this metaverse, and all that on a fully digital basis. One can be very critical about this aspect, of course, because probably also enormous profits can be made about this. And this may not necessarily be a good thing. So some of you may sigh now and think of science fiction, and this is actually where the term metaverse was coined. And others may wonder how this metaverse may be relevant for children and when we think about children in the next 10 years. Let me propose the following points why I think it is relevant. First, we've seen in the past that interfaces, or simply the way how we interact with a technology, has become more natural, as it is often called. The internet was heavily text-based, and we can easily add images and sound on internet applications. When we interacted with a computer in the past, we needed a keyboard. Now we interact with computers through touch screens and voice recognition. Essentially, this, naturalization of interfaces has made anything on the internet much more easily accessible for children. I believe that the same will happen in the metaverse, only that the basic handling of interactions will probably also become even easier than currently on the internet. Second, the current visions of the metaverse are more than gaming and virtual reality, but they are definitely strongly linked to current experiences in gaming and entertainment, and this may be particularly attractive to children. Third, children generally tend to be rather open to interaction and communication with machines. Much research on child-robot interaction shows how enthusiastic children are, at least initially, when it comes to interacting with machines. This may also show in the metaverse, I believe. Fourth, let's not forget the metaverse is always on and it never ends. So children can, in principle, continue in it all the time. Finally, the metaverse, through its very architecture and its strong reliance on mixed reality and virtual reality, will probably be one of the most immersive technologies ever. And we know that virtual reality, that when it is immersive, it really attracts users, particularly young users. So let me repeat, I'm really not trying to promote here the metaverse. And yet I have learned that it's always, with new technologies and existing technologies, important to try to take a balanced and nuanced view and consider both the opportunities and the risks that it brings. So let me start with what I consider some opportunities of the metaverse. In its emphasis on augmented and virtual reality, the metaverse may present an enormous potential for education. Whenever things cannot be explained in the traditional classroom setting, the metaverse may come in handy, not only to access locations or times that are not or no longer accessible, but also to create new forms of engagement. If the metaverse is indeed immersive, it should also help learning. Moreover, there may be new ways of teaching outside the classroom. I guess it is fair to say that the various lockdowns during the corona pandemic have made it very clear that current online teaching has still a long way to go. Last but not least, in terms of education, the metaverse may offer new ways of creative expression. A second opportunity of the metaverse may lie in therapy for children. Many things can be explained potentially better and easier in a virtual realm or with the help of it than in the physical world. It may also be that interaction with machines or machine-based agents may be experienced as less threatening than with real people. There's currently a thriving field of research on how children on the autism spectrum may benefit from interactions with social robots, and similar possibilities may emerge in the metaverse. At the beginning of the internet, scholars and public observers alike were concerned that it would lead to more loneliness. Very quickly, however, many social applications emerged around which new communities formed that offered new possibilities of inclusion, perhaps sometimes in an even more accessible way than in the physical world. I believe that because of its unlimited number of concurrent users, the metaverse may also create new possibilities of communities. Fourth and finally, there's always the hope that virtual environments enable children to compensate for problems they encounter in the physical world. This is not really about therapy, but simply about overcoming problems children may face in real-world encounters, for example, shyness or lack of self-esteem. So these were a few opportunities I saw. Let me now turn to some risks I see. First, as we've seen with the internet, problems may emerge when there is a lack of at least some regulation and control. And this definitely affects the youngest users. The current problems with the internet are multiplied in an environment that is probably even more complex and at the same time more easily accessible for the children. I'm thinking here of exposure to age-inappropriate content or age-inappropriate experiences. It is currently already difficult to control what children access and where they end up on the internet. But in an environment that aims for unlimited interoperability, this becomes even more of a challenge. Lack of regulation and control may also be related to mis- and disinformation. User-generated content is supposed to play a crucial role in the metaverse, and this may go hand in hand with misinformation and disinformation, certainly when machines will also create content as sources. Moreover, anti-social behavior may surface more than before because of the enhanced possibilities to interact in the metaverse in the form of cyberbullying that may create even more stress for children. A second risk, again not new, but probably magnified, is the creation and collection of ever more personal data. Because the metaverse is closer to users than the internet, because we are in it, because we behave and act in the metaverse, many more behavioral data can be collected about us than before. This allows for ever more fine-grained profiles also of children, of course. Another important aspect of the collection of ever more personal data is what Zsuzsanna Zuboff has called inequality in the division of learning. So the fact that those who collect the data and can analyze them can learn much more and much better than those who produce the data. This applies to all users of the metaverse, but it is particularly troublesome with children because they are less well equipped than adults to realize that they produce data and what can be done with these data. Zuboff also points to another problem with the current internet that probably expands with the metaverse: the automation of personal decisions. With ever more data, with automated interactions in the metaverse, and automated techniques of analyzing the data, predictive algorithms should become ever more fine-grained. The result may be that in the metaverse, much of what children or users more generally do is predetermined. For example, in which choices or alternatives are offered for decisions. The key question then is, and I'm certainly not the first to point this out, who decides what information and possibilities children are provided with in this metaverse. The one who decides this has really a very, very strong, very nearly unlimited power on what happens in this metaverse. A fourth risk I would like to point out refers to Zuboff's observation that participation on the internet can be described, and I quote here, in terms of necessity, dependency, foreclosure of alternatives, and enforced ignorance. Zuboff uses this to explain why we keep on using internet applications, although we may not want to. But I believe that this may also apply to the metaverse and probably children too. When something is as pervasive as the metaverse, it is difficult not to use it, and we may increasingly depend on it in our daily lives. And once we depend on something, for example, for work, but also in children's case for educational play, little other alternatives may exist, especially when we are kept uninformed about how things really work. So the metaverse may create a real risk in that it absorbs its uses. The opportunities and risks I just mentioned are speculation, based on what we've learned from the internet and generalized to the metaverse. In this context, it's difficult to say what needs to be done to ensure that children take full benefit from the metaverse. Still, I'd like to make a few suggestions. The first point is simple and at the same time complex. We should be aware that there are already strong and powerful developments that go way beyond the internet as we know it. Don't get me wrong. It is important to closely follow what's going on the internet, what children do and how it affects them. At the same time, we need to realize already now that the internet as we know it will most probably not exist anymore in 10 years from now. The metaverse is a fierce competitor, and we better be prepared already now, regardless of whether the metaverse materializes in the way defined earlier or only in particular elements of it. Second, I know it's difficult to develop legal frameworks for something that is as vague as the metaverse, but we should decide as quickly as possible whether everything that can be done also should be allowed. Of primary importance, notably for children, is to think carefully about access to content and the collection of data. In this context, it is, in my view, crucial not to delegate all responsibility to the user, as it is sometimes done, but make clear that the tech industry is responsible for what it offers. This applies even more so when it comes to children. Third, we lag behind in educating our children from an early age on about what and what not to do in digital worlds. This implies to educate them about how certain applications work, but also about why they work the way they do and what's really happening. Digital literacy is not so much about handling the digital world, but more about understanding it and about becoming critical digital citizens. Finally, the internet attracts children massively. And this will probably be even more so with the metaverse, not least because of its immersive character. And let's be honest, we are bad exemplars from whom they learn and from whom they learn one thing in particular, how socially acceptable it is to live a digital life. A heavily underestimated aspect of dealing with potential risks of new digital technologies in the future is, in my view, to increase the social acceptance of not fully participating in such environments and not being always online, or at least controlling one's participation better. I believe that as far as children are concerned, at least some of the problems with new technological environments, for example, the metaverse, could be reduced. So I hope that I could at least provide you with some food for thought in this talk. Again, time will tell what was right of what I said and what was wrong. It's the very nature of predictions and speculations that most of them are wrong. So my odds are not particularly good. Still, if I have stimulated you to think a little bit about what will come after the internet and what it may mean to children, I've achieved my goal. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you so much, Jochen. You certainly did a lot of food for thought. Indeed, very factual presentation. Thank you so much. I would like now to give the opportunity to our audience. If someone has any questions or comments for Jochen, please do raise your hand. We will be able to bring you in, and you will be able to directly have a conversation with Jochen. So please do raise your hand if you want to jump in here. And once again, please also share your thoughts and comments with us throughout the presentation of our speakers in the chat to make this as interactive as possible. And we have Elizabeth Milovidov, who raised her hand. So let's bring Elizabeth in, please. Hi, Elizabeth.
Good morning. This was absolutely fascinating. And at the same time, I was going online and looking for some of your research, just because I think that this is really the future. I think that you're absolutely right that we have to kind of look at this and realize, first, I believe that we really can do it, but we have to know, and we have to look at the risk and the opportunities. And I think really you did a fabulous job of laying it out for us. But I wanted to know more specifically if you had one more research that you could point us to, so that way we can follow you. I've already asked Sabrina. I said I want the PowerPoint because unfortunately I had a tech issue, so I could only listen to you. And then secondly, what advice, because I really did hear about tech companies and what they are providing, but what advice can you give to the other stakeholders, the parents, more importantly, the families? How can we really get ahead of this, already knowing that after the pandemic, we've had such trouble with screen balance and everything else, but how can we get ahead of what is this phenomenon of the metaverse that is coming? And in fact, it's already here.
So thank you very much for your words and your positive words about the presentation, Elizabeth. In terms of research of mine, I can point you to, well, I have not done research on the metaverse, and this is exactly the point why I took this opportunity to say something about it. I felt, and I said this in the beginning of this presentation, I felt in my own research that I'm always behind. Whether that was research on online communication, whether it's now research that I'm doing on child-robot interaction, I always feel that once we are ready with our studies, the technological developments have already moved forward.
Agreed.
So my main point here is, and that leads me to my honest answer to your second question, is that I think what we now can already do is to be aware of that. What we currently think is the internet, that this will be very, very quickly changed fundamentally. Again, virtual reality has been there for some years and for decades. And there are people saying, yeah, well, it has never really materialized. But there's currently so much interest in this in between, the virtual and the physical, so that this is fully blurred. And I believe that the first step that we can really do is to be prepared, to be aware of that there are really fundamental changes coming along, and really get our children to the point that that we are not only proud of that they can handle a search on something, or that they can talk to a digital agent, but that they are more prepared for what's really going on behind there. That it doesn't stop with just typing in a search item or something like that. So what I try to capture, and I think that's also the term that is used in the report, really move children more to critical digital citizenship. That is currently, I think, all we can do, because many of these developments are really so vague. But I guess if we have reached the awareness of there is way more to come, physical and virtual will blur. That this brings enormous possibilities for collecting even more data and screening us even more in a more fine-grained way. Then I think we've already achieved the first step.
Okay, wait, now I have to ask another question, a follow-up question. Sabrina, I'm sorry for monopolizing, but really, because I'm a mother of 11 and 14-year-olds, and I feel like as parents across the world, we've already failed with this first version of internet. So really, should we be so worried about this second iteration? Because quite frankly, awareness, we weren't aware the first around. And as much as we're, still behind and catching up, I hear you that critical thinking is the way to go, and that will always be the key. But you're scaring me now.
No, that's not my point. I really don't want to scare, nor do I want to attack dystopian.
Of course, yeah.
That's why I also made these opportunities very clear, and I believe that there are many really fascinating opportunities.
Do you think we can do it? I think that's the question. Do you think we can do it?
Let me just perhaps answer in one thing, and here I again go back to what Subov said. For example, in this interview to which I put the reference on one of the slides. She said one interesting thing is when we are now offered all these things about, should these cookies be allowed or not? She said that's the wrong approach. The question is not, should we decide about whether we want these data to be collected? The question should have been, should these data have been collected, should it have been allowed to collect these data in the first place? And I think this is a very important point. I think we all have to some extent really not realized on time what all these data collection possibilities on the internet really meant. And all of a sudden a reality has been established. And we now say, well, we missed sort of this opportunity, but it somehow worked out well. I think we should get one step further. I think now with enormously more possibilities to collect even more behavioral data and contextualize all these data, we should perhaps learn from this point of view. Do we have to be scared? Well, I don't know whether we have to be scared, but we should. I think protection of children is the wrong way. Yes, there need to be, of course, regulations in these things, in my view, but education is very important. And here I'm coming back to this point, I've also 2 daughters, you with your children. I think it is very important to make them aware of what's going on literally behind the screen. And that is, again, that I think is the first step to take.
Okay, I feel good again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jochen, for answering this question. There were similar comments and concerns in the chat, but I would like to bring in Shanta now. Shanta is working for Netflix. I think definitely one of the most popular platforms at the moment. And we know that Netflix is working in this space and that they are preparing or already have some tools on hand also available to support parents. So Shanta, please, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm dialing in from Toronto, Canada. I'm from Singapore. I really wish I was in Europe today. So it's great to be here virtually, and hopefully the next time it will be in person. I would love for more offline events, as Professor Joachim had suggested too. So thank you for having me here today. This is an incredibly important discussion. There's plenty of opportunity on the internet, but as we know, parents are increasingly concerned about children spending more time with their screens, access to age-inappropriate content, and so on. And it's an important topic, and Europe is, as always, at the forefront of these discussions. And there are many services and offerings on the internet today. I'm happy to share what we're doing at Netflix in particular to address these concerns. We definitely agree with Professor Joachim about education and empowerment. It's important and it's very central to how we approach things at Netflix. So I'll move on to the next slide, please. So key to just a quick introduction to Netflix. We are a subscription entertainment service. And so customers are paying us every month for their subscription to Netflix. And fundamental then to a subscription relationship is trust. We are a curated service. So all the content on Netflix are films, TV shows, professionally produced content. We don't serve ads on our service. And when we have a whole range of diverse and inclusive streaming content for the family to view together. And we really want to be able to offer parents the freedom to watch content on their own, freedom to watch content with their families, and the parental controls to empower them to tailor their experience for their families as they would like to do. when I talk about trust, our consumers are free to cancel their subscription at any point in time if we lose that trust to them. So for parents in particular, we are invested in ensuring that children are not shown content that their parents don't want them to watch, that we provide the information and tools for parents to help manage that experience as they are watching content on Netflix. And I think a key difference, for our service, which is media and entertainment, is just the manner in which content is being watched today on the internet. Today, consumers have much more choice, convenience, and control when they're watching content. It's different from switching on a TV and being exposed to whatever is on the television. Today, you have choice to make selections, and when you have choice, it's also important to make sure that information is upfront, context is provided, and there is technology in place to help manage that experience as well. And we have a wide range of tools and product features that are really designed to help empower parents and provide that context so that they have a good experience and continue to subscribe to our service. And I'm going to talk about several of those in the next slides. Slide, please. So we'll start with ratings and providing appropriate information to parents so that they can seek ways to assess which type of content they want to play or watch with their kids. Ratings provide important information and context about a show before someone makes the decision to watch it. So when we recommend shows to our members, it comes with ratings, information on the shows, content advisories. Before you even select the content, that information is there. When you press play before the show starts, that information is there again. We design our maturity ratings so that parents can make those choices in an informed way. Next slide, please. As you can see, just a couple of screenshots to show you. You can see the ratings here on the page, and on the next slide, before the show plays again, you get the rating as well as content advisories that speak to specific caution elements that a parent should be aware about when deciding whether they're going to play that show or not. Next slide. Another way that we provide context is through profiles. So on Netflix, you can have up to 5 profiles per household, and each profile can be customized by age. So parental controls can be set by each, depending on how old the user is. And we'll talk about this in a moment, and I'll share how the parental controls play in. But as you can see from this slide, mom and the older sister's account perhaps can be locked and have a parental PIN to prevent the younger kids from accessing their profiles. Ben, who maybe is 13, would have content that is filtered only for that age level. And kids under 12 will have like a dedicated kids profile, which I'll jump into next so that we can look at that in a bit more detail. So kids profile are a default on every Netflix account. When you subscribe to a Netflix account, you have adult profile and a kids profile. We want to make sure that this is not something that parents miss if they have children in their household. Next slide, please. So content that shows up here is below 12. You can set it to maturity ratings, and content is only surfaced based on that maturity rating. And it's clear from the design as well that children are within a controlled experience. There's a very simplified look and feel to the page, clear curation to show child-friendly content. And also kids' profiles don't allow direct access to accounts pages where you can adjust settings and parental control. So we make sure that it's quite a managed experience and ultimately a fun and engaging experience for children as well. Next slide, please. So stepping back a bit before I get into the meat of our parental controls, the way we design a service, our service is done with a lot of input from research, from customers, from third-party experts to really understand the needs of our members. Like I said, the relationship is really based on trust. So we need to know what our members need and expect from us in order to for them to continue to pay us every month and feel that they're deriving enough value and a meaningful experience from the service. And one of the surveys and research pieces that we've focused a lot on is parents. And if we go to the next slide, what we've found is that parents have very different attitudes, needs, and expectations when it comes to their kids engaging on the internet and with services like Netflix. Even within a country, you find a cross-section of different attitudes around this. For example, you have parents who are free range, and the internet is for their kids to explore on their own. They're very independent with the kids are very independent online. You have other parents who want to engage and have conversations with their children about what they're engaging with on the internet. There are parents who are what we term Velcro parents who are concerned about the risks on the internet, and that weighs in more heavily as they think about how their kids engage. And then you have pedagogical parents who really believe in the internet as being a stepping stone for their kids to learn and understand and be educated about the world. And you know, a parent can have all these different attitudes in their perspectives as well. So when we design the service, we know that parents are different, and our tools are really meant to empower their experience and help them manage how their family engages with the Netflix service the way they want. So next slide. I'll share a bit about our parental controls, and we can move to the next slide, please. The key goals for our parental controls is to make sure that they're accessible to our members who are parents. We want to be able to ensure that parents can restrict profile entry because we have something for everyone in terms of content on Netflix. So we want to make sure that inappropriate or age inappropriate content is not served up or accessible to our members' children who are not of the right age to watch that content. And of course, as has been discussed a lot, kids are on the internet a lot, and there are concerns about screen time. So we also want to make sure that post-play is disabled so that that experience is also managed and parents can more easily decide how much time they spend on Netflix. So next slide, I'll quickly run through a couple of the specific parental controls. So firstly, we have a profile hub. The main account holder, who is typically the subscription account holder, has access to a profile hub where they can manage the different profiles that are on the Netflix page. Next slide. And here you can see you can lock each individual profile with a unique 4-digit PIN. And the next slide, you'll see when you click onto any of the profiles that are locked, you would have to put in an access PIN. Of course, the PIN is meant to be held by the main account holder or parent and not meant to be shared with their children. The point is to have some restriction and 2 different profiles. So that is not meant to be shared. And on the next slide, you can see that for each individual profile, you can restrict content by maturity level. If there are particular titles that you are not keen for the child to watch in their profile, you can also remove them if the maturity level settings are insufficient for your preferences. Next slide, please. And then here you have the option to disable autoplay so that it doesn't go from episode to episode. You can make a decision about moving to the next episode as you're watching with your child. Next slide, please. And here, again, you can keep an eye on what your kids are watching and engage with them about it. You know, so again, I think, and we'll talk about this in the subsequent slides as well. You know, for the parents who want to keep an eye, engage with their kids about what they're watching, we want to be transparent as well. And so all this information is available on the Profile Hub. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we had recently launched, actually just a couple of weeks ago, is the Kids Recap email. And you know, we've talked a lot about the concerns that parents have about kids viewing things online, but it's also very much about education and engagement with your kids about what they're watching. So now what we're doing for any account that has kids profiles is to send a recap email so that parents have insight into what are the things on Netflix that their kids are engaging in and watching. There are printable coloring sheets, there are themes, topics, and there's themes and charts so that parents can actually bring the online experience offline and engage more with their kids about what they're watching on Netflix, but offline. Next slide, please. So finally, going back to the point on education, we know the importance of digital literacy and education to ensure that consumers are aware. Sorry, I think I went on mute for a second. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Okay,
now.
sorry.
No problem.
On that spiel of parental controls, I think ultimately we know that there's a lot of work to be done with parents and NGOs and ministries on helping to raise awareness about parental controls. Digital literacy is an important part of this. I think we all agree on that. And so a lot of our work at Netflix is, one, designing a service that can meet the needs of parents and empower them, but also working with a variety of organizations around the world and in Europe to raise awareness with parents about how to use these parental control profiles. We've worked closely in Europe with the European Commission and the Better Internet for Kids initiative. We've presented our parental controls to the European Safer Internet Centre. We've participated in the UK Safer Internet Day. And we look forward to working with more organizations as we go forward. The last thing I'll say is that there's also a lot of positive and engaging content on the internet. On Netflix, we've got tons of documentaries that we've put up that actually shed light on important issues that are going on in the world. One of the things that we did last year during COVID, when everyone was going virtual, was to put resources online, education resources that were paired with the documentaries that Netflix was releasing so that parents and teachers could actually use those resources and again have offline education, offline discussions about the content that they were watching in the internet. So at Netflix, we're really committed to providing the tools to empower parents in the experience online. We're committed to working together with organizations to support digital literacy efforts so that parents and children get the best of the online experience. Thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Shanta, for your presentation and all the great work you and your colleagues are doing at Netflix. We got some reactions from our audience, and which I would like to pick up now. We have a comment and a question from Andrew Williams. He's with the UK Safer Internet Centre, but certainly also a parent. He says, I love the ratings limit on Netflix, but my 13-year-old daughter hates it. Is there any plan to work to enable the release of an individual series/film that is above the age rating set in the profile? Sometimes we are happy for her to watch something that is older rated. Any thoughts on his comment and question?
Yeah, for sure. I think the Netflix service is really directed at the parents. So our members are parents and adults. And this is where I think if we go back to the slide on different kinds of parents have different needs, have different expectations. Some parents may prefer their kids to watch documentaries, for example, about climate change because it's educational. Some parents may feel it's too scary or it's too heavy content, right? So we really want to leave those decisions in the hands of the parents. So if you want your kid to watch something that perhaps is above the maturity rating, then the service is flexible for you to do that with your children. I think the idea is that you're watching together, right? So when you're watching together, you can manage and determine if there's a title that you want to watch with your child. You have the freedom to do that. And we've really tried to build the service to have that flexibility, but also ensure that there's a baseline set of controls that help to limit the experience and make sure that age and appropriate content is not being served up or recommended in the kids' profiles.
Thank you so much, Shanta, for answering that question. Andrew, I hope this helps. We have another comment from Emily. She's working with the French Safer Internet Center, and she's says sometimes it's very hard to pick up the right content when it comes to very young users, and she's referring to preschoolers, for instance, as the content are not classified by age. Any thoughts?
No, I think we work really hard to make sure that on Netflix, at least, there are ratings for all our content. And for younger kids, we have the categories of all and 7+, so that you can actually filter or adjust the content recommendations based on age grouping. So that is present on our service as you make selections about content. Like one on the kids profile, content that's recommended is based on the age maturity rating that you set for the profile. But on top of that, when you click on any title, you'll be able to see the rating with any advisories as well.
Thank you so much, Shanta, once again for all the great work that is happening already. I would like to bring in Matthias now. Matthias, who is working for the Austrian Safer Internet Center. And the Austrian Safer Internet Center has a lot of experience working with the youngest users already. So Matthias, we're really excited to hear some of your experience and the great work you're doing. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I will start my presentation. So hopefully everything is working. Yes. We talked about the future. We talked about one of the most used streaming platforms in the world. And now I want to give you some insights what we as Safer Internet Center in Austria are doing concretely for supporting caregivers and people who are using smartphones or giving smartphones to their children. And we started it catches our attentions on the bus and the playground and in restaurants. Almost every younger child uses a smartphone these days, and therefore we decided 2019 to explore when Austrian children make their first steps online and what challenges and risks their parents consider relevant and how we can help them. One of the main findings was that 72% of children under 6 in Austria uses digital media. We are talking about an age under 6. So you have to deal with this issue very early on, because that also means that media consumption doesn't just start when the child gets its first smartphone. 4 to 5 internet-enabled devices exists on average per household with children between 0 and 6 years for age. So there are a lot of things around where especially the youngest can use the internet and connect to the internet.
Sorry to interrupt you for a second. There are some comments in the audience. If you can put your presentation into the presentation mode, because I see that some colleagues are not able to see your slides yet.
It's better now.
I see your slides, but they are not in presentation mode, so we can also see some of your notes. Yes, that works now. Great. Thank you.
Very much. Thank you very much. Teams hard. So yes, sorry for that. On average, children are 1 year old when they use an internet-enabled device for the first time. So when you think about the children which are using smartphones, they are in Austria on average 1 year old. What are they doing there? We asked them, and the most thing they are doing on the smartphone is watching videos, taking pictures, listening to music, and we found that significantly more frequent among 0 to 2 years old is talking to people, of course, FaceTime and video calls, especially during the pandemic. Now we know are already how to use that, and significantly more frequent among 3 to 6 years old are playing games on the smartphone. Then we ask to think about the digital and internet-enabled devices the children is using, and we found out that 50% of these devices are devices of the parents. This is actually a big problem, because the whole algorithm and the whole advertising stuff is based on an adult using the smartphone. And especially we have special things when the children are playing free games, they're getting advertising for adult stuff. And so there is some information we have to give parents when they are giving out their device. Of course, it's important to set the right context for these parents. I'm also a parent. We are on the move digitally. We are using it daily. We found out that on average they spend 2 hours a day for the private purpose, and they have no or little our own experience. And we heard it already today from a comment. Because of course in their childhood, in my childhood, we had nobody to talk about smartphone and media consumption like we are using it today. But also we found out that a very good thing, 75% of the parents agree that they are great role models and they are important role models for them. And this is also one of the main thing we want to give to you, that the role model thing is very, very important, because the children are learning, of course, using the smartphones by watching you using it. 9 out of 10 of the parents take certain precautions of their children. But also 70% said that the child has already come into contact with unsuitable content. So it is a thing and it is important. One thing is also important for 10%, we found out for the 3 to 6 year old, watching videos before falling asleep is essential. And this is also a big problem because they are getting used to it. And it's an easy way to get children to sleep, but it's also sometimes problematic because the media consumption rises. We have a nice quote from a kindergarten child. She was 5 years old, 2019. Cell phones should be banned on subways so the adults will engage with us more again. So important quotes to think about. And one last slide from the study. We also asked the parents how old was the children when you or others first sent the photos of the child, and of course 30% of the pictures were taken before birth. They are from ultrasonic pictures, and they are sent in family groups. So it's interesting in that we think that the first media consumption or first digital contact of children is when they have their first smartphone, when it even starts before birth. So the big question now is what's to do? And as I pointed out before, adult caregivers are required. We called it the problem digital pacifier. The problem is also the lack of clarity about whether there is a developmental psychological effect, and if so, what they are, because we are in the middle of the research doing it ourselves. Of course, we have the problem that to be unable to engage self or process emotionally difficult situations, because as parents and as caregivers, you have to deal with this with difficult situations. And when you don't want to do that, then the child is crying and you give the smartphone, then the problem is, of course, it just stops crying, but there is no discussion, and she's not learning or he's not learning anything about. There is this frightening content, of course, as I mentioned before, especially when they are giving the smartphones from themselves and the abusive use of photos, of course, when you're taking every step and every second pictures of your child, it's a big problem, because they are also learning for themselves that it's important for the parents to use the smartphone. The tips we are giving: beware to being a role model, give the child your full attention, no distraction. With the very youngest, we give the tip to delay the use of digital devices as much as possible. The use of digital media only in exceptional cases, for, as I mentioned before, calming down, and in case of boredom, set rules and be consistent. And we know that rules are working, so we are also getting, for children above 6, the feedback that rules are working and they're good for them. Select suitable content. Good thing Netflix told us how to do that. And send only selected photos of the children only to certain contact. Big problem are also big family groups on Facebook, etc., where they're sharing a lot of pictures and photos to get good feedback. Of course, you're getting feedback, but there are also people who shouldn't get the photos. What have we done? What have we produced to help parents? We have this very popular folder. It's called in English, Mom, Can I Go on Your Phone? There are top 10 tips for parents with children between 3 and 6 years old. We also translated it in Arabic and German and a lot of other languages. We are producing videos in the format of information videos, 2 to 5 minutes, where you can see here it's called Frag Barbara. This is Barbara, our pedagogical advisor, and there we try to present comprehensively what we think is good for you. Together with the ISPA, the Internet Service Provider Austria, we are producing brochures for the topics apps for 1 to 11, and also the technical child protection on the internet, where we concrete advice on what you can do, or especially also what you can't do when you use Google Family Link or Apple Screen Time, for example. We have for the youngest, it's called it's a read aloud book for parents and their children, the online zoo. It's also translated in 10 languages already. And in addition, there's also an accompanying educational booklet for users in classes. So we are trying to educate them in a very graphical way. And for the kindergarten, for several years now, we also have seen a very strong increase in requests for workshops in kindergarten. And we have therefore decided to develop our own handbook. It's unfortunately only in German, but there we have exercises, we have exercise sheets, we have important tips for safe internet topics. And it's interesting because this is also a lot of discussion. Why should we go to the kindergarten? Nobody has a digital device there. But a lot of safer internet topics can also be dealt without the digital device, such as topics about emotion. For example, what do I do when I am afraid? Or secrets, which can be later translated into the topic of passwords. So yes, in summary, 72% in Austria between the age 0 and 6 uses internet-enabled devices, at least occasionally. They are on average 1 year old. 22% already have their own devices. We are talking about children between 0 and 6. 30% of families' pictures were sent even before they were born. And almost half of the parents think that the children between 0 and 6 spend too much time on the internet. But the majority of parents are aware that they have a role model effect, and they're using this information also. Perfect. Thank you very much for the time and the possibility to present. And I'm trying to stop now.
Thank you so much for your presentation, and especially all the resources you shared with us. There are definitely some comments in the chat of colleagues asking if you could share the links to all these great resources you have presented. They are definitely needed. There was one question more, a point for clarification from Yvonne, where she's asking if the figures that you are presented at the beginning are numbers for Austria only.
Yes, they are for Austria only.
Okay, and Yvonne, I also point you to the Better Internet for Kids portal. Maybe my colleagues can put the reference in the chat, where you will also find work and figures from other of our safer internet centers across the EU. So this might be very helpful. We are very tight on time, but I hope people can stay with us for another 5 or 10 minutes or so, because we also started a little later, because I would like to bring all our 3 speakers back now, and also give again the possibility to our audience to ask any questions or share any comments. So please, we can bring you in. If you have any comments or questions, please do raise your hand and we will unmute you. And in the meantime, while I give everyone a moment to do that if they wish to, there was a question earlier on from Yvonne that was directly addressed to Jochen, but maybe also Matthias, you can jump in here. She's asking, how can we help our children to learn how to deal with technique today? Shouldn't schools have a much bigger role in teaching our children how to deal with it? Are there any programs that teachers at primary schools could follow? Maybe Jochen, you can go first.
I just wanted to suggest that Matthias perhaps knows about these programs, but I'm happy to say a few words. I think, and I don't want to reproach schools here for lagging behind. I think most of us do. But I do think generally that there should be more awareness, and I said this before, of not just teaching the skills to, maneuver a digital world, like giving children iPads and then be happy that they, can use a touch screen and know how to open apps and use these apps. But important here is really, and I think Matthias already with the material he showed, suggested that too, that you need to from a very early age on simply show what is really going beyond and behind, what's going on behind all these apps, and where there are really the problematic things like data collection, like violations of privacy. That is, I think, what really, in my view, in my subjective impression of digital literacy education, is really still not developed sufficiently.
Yeah, maybe I just can add the point of mine that, of course, you all think about school and there is the fixed frame where the children can go there and have to be taught stuff. But of course, it's way more important to start way earlier than in school. When they are in school, they already have 6 to 7 years media contact, and it's way more important to educate this to and bring the information to the parents so they can deal with that. Unfortunately, yes.
Thank you so much, Jochen and Matthias. And maybe to pick up another comment that was posted a bit earlier on from Anna from the European Commission. She says, I'm always wondering how to make our offline reality as attractive as online. I have the impression that offline becomes more and more gloomy and dark, and online more rainbow, at least from the perspective of children. How to prepare them for this metaverse that Jochen was talking about? No clue. She's very honest, and of course, not only Anna, but also other members in the audience seem quite to be scared. She says, I agree, it starts with awareness, but it's just a first step. Any comments or thoughts from you 3 on her comment?
Just a small comment. I think it's very important to stop thinking about the difference between offline and online, because for children this doesn't exist, and I think that's the most important thing we have to learn. There is no difference for them, and so when you start thinking about how we can help them better understand what is online and what is maybe also bad on the web, you have to also think about why they are there and what are their needs, and to support them best.
Thank you so much, Matthias. We just got also another question from Rodrigo. He works for the Safer Internet Center in Brazil, and he's asking, do you have any example of parent education specifically for parents with any literacy at all? So videos or other ways also to address, for example, more poor families, and to make sure that they are staying aware and stay in start any moderation there. Maybe Matthias or Shanta.
Sorry, Shanta. The brochure for the 10 tips for parents for children of 3 to 6. Mom, can I go to your phone? This is especially designed for parents who don't know anything, and that's the way we try to find the information, or try to give the information to the parents. Sorry, Shanta.
No problem. I was just going to add on to that I think that's where, even to the earlier question about education in schools, it's also very much about education for parents and understanding that parents are at different stages of the digital journey themselves. And that's where I think the partnerships are important, for the private sector to be partnering with NGOs and ministries and producing content and education material that's also across mediums. For example, we've worked in the UK on a physical checklist which can be printed out and distributed in schools. We have videos, we have social media assets, and so I think we have to meet parents where they are, also in their own languages. That's another important area of localization. And then really working through local organizations, who have touch points with parents from different, from different backgrounds and communities. So that multi-stakeholder approach is really important, and being thoughtful about how to reach parents where they are.
Thank you, Shanta. There is another question also addressed to you from Trude. She says, different countries have different age ratings and guidelines for age ratings. Is this something Netflix takes in consideration, or are the age ratings the same in all countries?
So I think what we've found is actually that the key concerns and themes that members are concerned about around the world are similar, but the impact and frequency may differ. So, for example, sexuality may be something that's more liberal in certain markets compared to others, and in maybe other markets, there's more concern about violence, right? So we do try to tailor the ratings and weight it based on the concerns that members have specifically, but we do also at the same time try to keep consistency in terms of the ages. But we maintain a flexible approach depending on the country we're operating in, and ultimately it's about what the members expect from the experience. Again, going back to the point that we have to meet members where in terms of what they're comfortable with and what they expect. And so we do a lot of research and connect with our members to understand, are our age groupings something that makes sense for you? And then try to tailor that experience also according to members in that market. But consistent that the concerns are honestly very similar around the world. So I think that's also a good thing, and it's the balance between those broader concerns and then individual member expectations.
Thank you so much, Shanta. And also my colleague has started sharing some links to the resources Matthias mentioned in his presentation. So please do have a look. And we also have a comment from a colleague from the European Commission. And definitely, Matthias, you made a good point that the online and the offline world, that's the same world, especially for the younger users and for young people. Thank you so much, everyone, for being with us. We will come closer to the end of this deep dive, but I really hope that you will continue the conversation I think there were very nice points made. We need to meet parents where they are, and there is a bit of hope with this new generation of parents. So really happy also to end on this positive note, but of course there is still a lot of work to do, and it all starts with awareness. So thank you very much again to Jochen, Shanta and Matthias joining us today. That was a really, really great session, and to all of you for posting your comments and questions. What is happening next? We all go in a very well-deserved lunch break now. We do hope that you will be able to continue and stay with us through the afternoon. We will continue at 2 o'clock Central European Time. There will be another deep dive session taking place, and this deep dive will focus on digital inclusion. So we will continue the conversation. There will be again colleagues from academia, from our Safer Internet centers, and also a representative from Microsoft on this panel. So you surely don't want to miss this. Please, we see you again at 2 o'clock Central European Time. Check also your inbox where you find the right link to connect to this session. I hope this was very helpful. Thank you once again to our speakers, and I wish everyone a good lunch break now, and see you at 2 o'clock. Thank you very much.